Okay, with that, I'd like to introduce this morning's keynote speaker, David Barry. David has been in the coaching and teaching executive leaders since 2001. He began in the world of professional training and development by selling services and leading programs for Blessing White Inc. This led to an invitation to join TaylorMade Adidas Golf Company as their first vice president for leadership and organizational development. David led his team in the establishment of TaylorMade's Learning Center, the heart of which was a leadership coaching initiative in support of the company's extraordinary growth from $600 million to $1.6 billion in revenue. In 2013, David founded Rule 13 Learning to serve leaders who want to be more resilient, more effective, and more human in the face of change. In 2016, David published his first book, A More Daring Life, Finding Voice at the Crossroads of Change. Please help me welcome David Barry.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Just turn this off.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning all the way in the back. Thank you. There it is. I love it. I'm speaking to you. My name is David Barry. I own and lead a company called Rule 13 Learning. I absolutely hate change.
That's right.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. Kevin and I agreed earlier we're going to have a little conversation throughout the keynote this morning. I can't stand change. I can't stand change for a number of reasons, mostly because I like to be in control. Mostly because I like things how I've created them. Mostly because as a human being, I'm totally committed to known routines and the status quo. After all, that is a key part of our survival mechanism. I hate change so much that I dedicated my professional life to trying to figure out why I hate it so much and how I can get better at dealing with it for myself and for all the people I get to work with. Now, what's going on, I suspect, in your minds is one of two conversations when I say how much I dislike change. Some of you are saying, yep, me too. Can't stand it. Don't like it, don't want it, keep it to yourself. And then there are a few of you, maybe more than a few, saying, I don't know what the big deal is. I think change is great. I welcome change. Those of you who are saying that, my guess is you're talking about the change that was your idea. I have great ideas for change. I can tell all kinds of people and all kinds of leaders and all kinds of organizations what they should be doing differently. I love those ideas. They're great. But the kind of change I'm talking about, the change that you and I know gets under our skin, frustrates us, and challenges us to show up in the best way, the way we would like to show up on a given day, is the change that comes from one of two things. Someone comes to you and says, hey, I think there's a better way to do this. I'm going to upset the apple cart of your daily experience with a better idea, and you resist it, even though after analysis you might agree it's a good idea. You don't like it because it was someone else's, small or large. And the other kind of change that really unnerves us are those unexpected events. The big things that happen. Maybe they're weather-related, maybe they're illness-related, maybe they're just the randomness of life happens to strike your small piece of the universe on a given day, and you can only put your arms up and go, could never have seen that coming. And then you have to make a choice. And I will say, perhaps this is the concluding statement of my talk, a little early. The author Viktor Frankl is famous for having written, the last of the human freedoms. The last of the human freedoms is our ability to choose our response to any given set of circumstances. And that ultimately the opportunity we have for change is to really, really think hard about how we want to show up in the face of it. What choice do we want to make when we have to confront the unexpected? What choice are we willing to make when someone comes to us with a better way? And even though inside we're grumbling, thinking, I wish I had had that idea, I don't really like this person, I can't believe we're actually going to do this, we can make a different choice in that moment. We can rise above ourselves and our deep, deep commitment to the status quo and move forward with more energy, more positivity, more sense of possibility. We always get to make that choice. And this is the thing that frustrates me most about change, is we always get to make that choice. I'd like to blame someone else. I'd like to put it off on somebody else. But I get to decide how I deal with it. And so today, I'm not standing up here. I promise you, it's not a bit. It's not a setup. I really don't like it. And I'm not standing up here as someone who's figured it out. For sure, I have not. I am standing up here as someone who feels so passionately about leaders, people of influence, getting their arms around change in a more productive way, that I just want to share some stories with you about how I have struggled to do that. And out of those struggles and from these stories, the three key things that have stood out to me over and over again about how I can do a better job next time. That's it. And that if one or two or even three of those ideas, those invitations resonate with you, and you consider through the rest of this conference, and more importantly, in your life and in your work beyond your time here in Carlsbad, if you consider these as possible additions to your personal toolkit, then you might change the conversation that you have about the nature of change in your work, in your family, and with and among the people you lead and work with every day. I wish the left side of this slide were true. And if you, like me, have routines, I get up and I have a cup of coffee. Someone said, I just get up and exercise. And I said, that's crazy. You have to have coffee first. And then I like to read a little bit. And then I might take the dog out. And then I might make, routine, routine, routine. It's a consolation. It feels good. Someone says, can you be early for this? Can you do this instead? And that jagged line starts to go. And then I recognize on my better days, that's actually what life is. It is not the straight line. And the sooner I get comfortable, we all get comfortable with that, the better off we're going to be. So here are the invitations. It's not a great idea to use the word radical at 8:15 on a Monday morning to any audience, but I'm throwing it out there anyway because I want to get your attention. And truthfully, I think if you only did one thing on here, it would be this first one. There's no way any of us is going to get better at anything unless we're willing to take an honest look at ourselves first. And so what is that honest look for you? And Kevin asked me earlier, or mentioned earlier, that in past speakers, they'll go on and on about these great ideas, and finally, someone will say, yeah, but what's the point? Like, how do you actually do it? And what a great question. And so I'll go to that right now. You want to commit to radical self-awareness? I have a suggestion. Ask the people in your life who love you some honest questions about you. Ouch is right. You can do a 360 assessment. There's only 1 million of them. And you can pay the money and go through that, and that's not a bad way to go at all. Some of you have gone through this particular form of torture. It's great fun. Or you can just ask a few people. And the really courageous person asks someone who they know doesn't just love them no matter what. Someone who might have a critical point of view about you, someone who's given you some tough feedback in the past, and you might sit down and go, hey, how am I at my best? What are my strengths? Hey, how am I when I'm stressed? And what do you most like, and what would you suggest I do differently? You can do that. That's a choice, back to our ability to choose. What I have learned in discovering and working with leaders is that most leaders, most people already know their stuff. We already know. We have blind spots, for sure, but most of us already know how we get ourselves into trouble. But the validation of someone else speaking truth to us can really open our eyes. It also toughens us up a little bit. And there's nothing wrong with that. So radical self-awareness in the face of change means we know how we're likely to show up under stress and the anxiety of something different happening. Therefore, we can predict that and do something different about it in the moment. The second one is we are not doing this alone. This is not a conference of one. You come together because it's advantageous to you to have relationships in your industry. It's advantageous to you to have like-minded people, people with similar concerns, people with similar challenges, so you can learn from one another. And out of that learning, make new decisions. And maybe even out of that learning, decide as a group, we're going to stand for this now. And that's going to help our entire industry grow, or even just survive, depending on the circumstances, yeah? And then interpersonally, I don't know about you, but when I'm under the stress of change, one of the classic things that I do is completely shut myself off. And it's exactly the opposite of what we should be doing under that stress. But I shut myself off because you might tell me, back to that feedback part, you might tell me something I don't want to hear in that moment. You might challenge me to get off my rear end and do something about it. And I want to enjoy my pity party because it's super fun. Our relationships are everything under normal circumstances. In change, it's the whole thing. We have to surround ourselves with people who can help us see clearly, who can challenge our thinking, and who can move us forward even when we are so resistant to doing so. Bless you. Keep moving forward. Okay, maybe it's a little cliched. I also think about this as keep learning, keep stepping out. Instead of saying stuck in the face of the unknown, let's go discover something else. Because there are answers out there. There are new methods. There are new possibilities. But if we're stuck in place, we're never going to find them. We don't stand a chance. And then everything else, as they adapt, everyone else, every other person in our industry, all our competitors are going to pass us by because they got out there and started learning at precisely the time we were still stuck worrying about it. Back to relationships. Who in your circle can say, David, Kevin, what else can we be learning right now? This is a huge opportunity. I know it's frustrating. I know we're challenged. But there's got to be something. How do we do that right now? Let's go. So 3 stories to help illustrate these 3 points. 5 or 6 years ago, at precisely this time of year, actually, I went to the Pacific Northwest, a little very beautiful island called Whidbey Island, about an hour north of Seattle, for a conference. And I got there on a Sunday afternoon, and it was a long day of travel and the drive, and you got to take the ferry over. And so, as I'm likely to do, I want to go stretch my legs. I got to go burn off a little bit of that stored up travel energy. And this conference is on the grounds of this just beautiful retreat center set in the forest. And I'm wandering through these trails and just taking in just the beauty of the Northwest, breathing in that great healthy air, detoxing from the trip. And I say, I'm going to get up every morning of this conference, and I'm going to walk and hike and even maybe run on my more ambitious mornings some of these trails. What a great way that'll be to start each day of this conference. I know I'll feel at my best. So the evening goes and dinner, and I get to bed, and my alarm goes off at 6 a.m. I didn't calculate that in the Pacific Northwest, before we set our clocks back in the fall, just like here even this morning a little bit, but much more accentuated up there, it's just about as dark as if it was 2 in the morning. So at 6 a.m., guess what else is happening in the Pacific Northwest on this particular morning? It is raining crazy, okay? And I'm in that moment where I get a little, like I feel a sense of personal challenge. Like, am I going to say to my colleagues, yeah, I didn't want to go for a walk this morning because it was raining, and then validate my sort of weak and flabby Southern California heritage, you know? So I put on my gear. I'm smart enough to bring gear. I know that it rains there, so I put on my gear. I have this tiny little flashlight, and I have a map of this trail system. And in my, great sort of bold, endeavoring way, I march out, and I'm getting soaked, and it is dark and not getting lighter, and I just get completely lost. And enough light comes up that I'm able to retrace my steps, hustle back, get a shower, and get to the meeting on time. Well, so now it's game on, yeah? So the next morning, I'm like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to have that same awesome trail experience I had the day I showed up. It's still really, really dark because it's still 6 in the morning. It's still raining, but I'm more confident now because I understand a little bit more about the trail system. I don't do a lot of things at half speed. And so on this second morning, completely overconfident, I just go, and I go as fast as I can, and I get lost for a second day. So I'm feeling a little bit humbled, but also at this point, I'm just kind of pissed off. Because it's not that complicated. It actually is a little bit complicated now that I look at that. But it's not complicated for somebody who patiently and thoughtfully prepares themselves for the experience. It's not complicated, let's say, for somebody who's been there before. And when you add in all of these dotted lines and the darkness and the rain, you could start to make a case for the fact that this actually might be a challenging thing to go and do. But you'd be talking to the wrong person. Because I would say, no, I got this. Third morning. Up I go, more energized because now I'm more committed to beating the trails, right? So now it's a conflict. The trail has done nothing wrong to this point. It's just being a trail. It's just there waiting for me to figure out why I'm so resistant to slowing down and paying attention. I get lost again. I would have gotten lost the fourth day, but I actually had to go to the airport and fly home. So I was left with this lingering, full truckload of evidence about myself. And that evidence suggests that I was so stubborn in the face of that unknown, in the face of a changed environment, that I wouldn't slow down long enough to notice it's actually a well-marked trail. But the trail markers are about here, and they're not that hard to see with a flashlight. They have bold red letters on them, and they tell you exactly where to go. You have to be willing to slow down long enough to notice them, for them to be of any help. And the more I've thought about this in the context of radical self-awareness, I recognize my propensity to race out in front. This isn't everyone's style, but many of you have this style. You're doers, you're goers, you activate. And then people in your dust behind you are left going, but why and how are we going to do it? And have we actually checked the plan? And is this the right path? In this context of change, should we really be going in this direction? And you're just full steam ahead. Well, that's me. And so now I can take that self-awareness, not the first time I understood that about myself, mind you, but a time when it really sank in the way that getting lost 3 mornings in a row will do. And so now, at my best, before starting anything new, before confronting any new endeavor, I pause and say, how do I resist the temptation to race down the trail in the dark, ahead of my team, ahead of my friends, ahead of my family, to make sure we agree this is the best way to go? And if you're at all like this, that phrase, that idea of a pause, that idea of hesitating even just a moment, probably makes your skin crawl a little bit, because you just want to go. That the most obvious reaction in the face of change is to act. Except sometimes the best thing to do is actually to hang on a second and get our bearings, and back to relationships, talk to those people around us who can help us make a better decision than we might make on our own. Guarantee you, had I been out there with someone else on those mornings, we wouldn't have gotten lost, because they would have challenged me to take a look around. Story number 2. My father-in-law, until just recently, lived in the Mount Shasta area of Northern California. And so my family and I would make an annual summer visit up to see Dad, Grandpa, 13 and a half hours in the car from our home in Vista to his front door. And the kids were okay with this trip for a while, but when they got a little bit older, we started to realize they didn't look forward to going on this trip at all. And they love their grandpa, and we actually enjoy spending time together as a family. But what we realized is that there's just not that much to do up there. It's kind of an isolated place. And unless you're into cutting alfalfa for hay, or raising cattle, or shooting at stuff, this is not your place. And all 3 of those things are things my father-in-law does expertly and that I don't do at all. So we go see Grandpa. We recognize on this trip about 6 years ago, we got to do something different when we get up there. We got to create a better experience for the kids. I said, Teresa, what are we going to do? She says, we used to go fishing at a place called Kangaroo Lake. It's about an hour from my dad's. We'll do a picnic, and I'm thinking immediately cold beer, fishing. Those are 2 things that go together, so I can get behind this. Let's go fishing. Perfect. I don't know a thing about fishing. Doesn't matter. It's an activity, an event. It'll be a fun day. Beautiful day. Absolutely spectacular, bluest blue skies, ice cold mountain lake water. I mean, it's just the picture book of the mountain lake fishing experience. Well, having mentioned I don't shoot at things, nor do I fish for things, nor do I raise cattle or cut alfalfa for hay, my father-in-law knows all of that. And so understanding the limited capacity I have for anything outdoors related, he goes to Walmart and buys us 2 of these $20 fishing rods. And it could not be simpler, but I assembled these things as if I was putting together a rocket to the moon, okay? This was some serious, serious business. So much so that my daughters almost wandered off before we could get started because I was paying so much attention to getting this exactly right. Because of course, I have to prove my father-in-law wrong. He who is confident we will not be catching any fish. I get them assembled. I hand the first rod to my daughter, Avery, who's here on the left. And Teresa helps Avery kind of just get that line gently tossed into the very shallowest waters of the lake. And as that's happening, I turn to my left and hand the other rod to my daughter, Davis. And I help her get that line in, and just as that's happening, I hear from my right shoulder, over my right shoulder, Avery say, "I caught a fish." And out of Kangaroo Lake comes about a 6-inch rainbow trout. Most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life. At that moment, I hear Davis say, "Dad, I caught a fish," and up comes a brown trout. I am so embarrassed at how proud I was. It felt like the crowning achievement of my fatherhood career, my son-in-law career, just my life. Because I'm not supposed to be good at this. My dad thinks we can't figure it out. We're there 5 minutes, and the girls have caught a fish each. We catch our limit, drink a cold beer, have a great lunch, and have a spectacular day. The next summer comes. We're going to see Bob again. What do you think we're going to do? Yeah, we're going fishing. We're going fishing because I am an expert fisherman, obviously. And when we get to Bob's house, the rods are sitting in the corner of the garage, and I pack them up, and we pack out back to Kangaroo Lake. We go to the exact same spot. The day is a carbon copy of the year before. Everything is the same. I put the girls in the same spots. I hand them the rods, bait them up just like we did the year before, get the lines in the water, and then, of course, what happens? Nothing happens. We wait. And now I get a little dialogue going in my mind, right? Like, well, surely this works because one other time I've done this, it worked. It worked spectacularly well, actually. And I didn't know what I'm doing. This year I know what I'm doing. So this is going to be great. Just be patient, David. You know your radical self-awareness. You know how impatient you are? So just be patient. Let the process work. It wasn't working. It wasn't working. And that wasn't so bad, except what was happening around us. So there was a couple to our right catching fish after fish. They were just sort of jumping out of the lake into their lap, and they were cradling them and having the happiest time. And we could do nothing. And these kind people, suffering through my resistance to consider another way, my defensiveness about it, the death grip that I had on the fishing pole, white-knuckling it, sure, I can make this work. Finally, take their can of bait and just gingerly, gently tap it along the railing and sort of casually say, hey, they're really liking this stuff today. I was having none of it. No. We're good. We're good. Are you kidding me? They must have given me the most epic eye roll ever, right? What is this guy's problem? And I persisted for an hour, achieving nothing. Well, the girls, that's not interesting for anyone. Till Teresa takes the girls and they actually go have some fun, because remember, that was sort of the point. Well, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed somebody packing up their gear, full string of fish. But I had this sixth sense that they weren't just leaving. I had the sense that they were coming over to speak to me. And when it was obvious that that's what was happening, I remember like turning my body, like a little kid will do when they've done something wrong. They'll like hold their hand up to their parents like, you can't see me, I didn't really do that. I kind of wanted to disappear. And what I heard when he was 50 or so feet away, I sure would like to see your kids catch some fish. And that just broke the whole thing wide open. And I said, yeah, me too, but here's the deal. I know how to do this, and I don't understand what's wrong. He says, well, what do you mean? He goes, I said, well, I was here a year ago in this very spot, and we just caught all these fish. And he asked me this bizarre question. He says, when were you here? I couldn't, I was like, I couldn't compute. What do you mean, when were you here? I said, when were we here? Early June. He said, oh, it's the end of July. Like, this explains everything. I said, buddy, like I'm a kindergartner, okay? Help me here. What is going on? He said, so you're fishing in a cold water mountain lake, and you're fishing for cold water loving trout. And as the summer goes on, the surface temperature of the water increases. And because of it, the trout go deeper into the lake to find the cold water. You have a bobber on your line. Everyone know what a bobber is? Yeah, really bright yellow-orange thing. It just keeps your hook about a foot or so below the surface of the water. Great for June the previous year, not so good for late July this year. And as soon as he said it, I looked, not another person on the lake. Not a single bobber to be found. I had no idea what I was doing. He says, do you mind if I reset your lines? Out of his own tackle box, bobber comes off, heavier weight comes on, because we're going to have to cast out into deeper water now. He says, your hook is fine, your bait is fine, you just have to put it where the fish are. Perfect line, I'll never forget it. You just have to put it where the fish are. All I had around me, invitation number 2, build relationships. All I had around me were relationship building opportunities. If I had simply said yes to the offer of bait, and then not even taken the bait, as it were, but just started a conversation and said, you know what? This isn't working for us today. You have any tips? I'm sure in like 8 seconds I would have said, yeah, just get that bobber off your line, you'll be fine. But they knew that I wasn't open to that connection because I was too committed to my personal status quo. So I had no chance of relationship. The only relationship I eventually got in was because somebody took a 2x4 to my head and interjected themselves into our experience. And then we created a relationship out of this person's awareness of what was happening. This person being able to see my blind spot and do it in a really beautiful way, right? Not coming up and saying you got it all wrong, but coming up in an effort and in an attempt to be helpful. And so this just solidified for me back to self-awareness and now into relationship, how easy it is to shut off connection, to shut it off when things aren't going precisely as we want them to go, because if we find out I'm wrong, if I find out I've done something I shouldn't do, I don't want to feel the shame of being wrong. I'm a professional adult person. I'm supposed to know how to do things, even when the thing is something I've never done before. What an interesting way we can talk to ourselves sometimes, and what a wonderful way to never try anything new. It was easy to try fishing that first day because I'd never done it before. What could go wrong? But after one day of success, I had a new story, and that was that I was good at this, and therefore to be proven wrong would make me too vulnerable to feel. Without those relationships, we couldn't have gotten back to a place of success, which we eventually did. And the good news is it didn't happen right away, not like the year before. When we got the lines reset, he taught us how to cast, we got the lines out into deeper water, and sooner or later those fish started coming in as he predicted they would do. No chance of that happening without starting even a tentative relationship with another human being. Keep moving forward. Decide to continue to learn. This is invitation number 3. If you're spending time here in San Diego, maybe you've been down to La Jolla, maybe you've been down to the Bluffs, just on the south side of the Torrey Pines golf course. There's a beautiful space there above those cliffs that's called the San Diego Glider Port. And it's just this, I guess it's got to be about 100 to 200 yard expanse of grass that just gently slopes down to the cliff edge. And people get on these parasailing devices and just float around above the cliff and above the ocean. And so my wife thought it would be a great idea to get me this experience for my birthday one year. And it seemed like a great idea. But you don't just go there and do this. You go into this little building, and I signed more documents that day than I did the last time I bought a house, yeah? And as I'm signing yet another waiver and handing over not a small sum of money for this experience, my attention shifts from the romantic idealism of floating above the Pacific Ocean to the very, very cold, hard truth that I have no idea how this works. And the creepiest thing about it is that the place is totally silent. And now I'm in my highly cognitive mode of needing to understand how things work. And I'm sure there's a mechanism, a motor, a launching device, a catapult, I have no idea. There's gotta be a device for getting these things off of that beautiful grassy earth up into the sky. But I can't see it. I can't find it. I have no idea. So waivers, 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 money handed over. Here's your coach, your guide for this experience. he starts to tell me about the harness, and he gets me in this big, heavy harness. He straps in behind, gets buckled in, and I look over my shoulder, and I see this kite, this sail, just dragging on the ground behind us. And all I can think about are those times as a kid when I inexpertly attempted to fly a kite, and it would crash, and because I was lazy, I didn't want to walk over and do the whole spooling up, and so I would just drag it back to me. You remember that? And it would just bounce along the grass. And that's what this sail looked like behind me. And I thought, well, that's not giving me a lot of confidence about this experience. So I finally broke down, and I just said, hey, how do we get up there? And he said, oh, that's the best part. We walk off the edge of the cliff. I said, the hell we do. I'm not walking off the edge of the cliff. He goes, no, you got it. You got to walk off the edge. Well, I had no idea what was happening. What was happening is an ancient relationship between the ocean and that cliff face. And that ancient relationship is also known as wind. And up above on that grass, 100 or so yards back, it just feels like a beautiful San Diego breeze. No big deal. But what's going on is it's racing in off the water, hitting the base of that cliff 300 feet down, and then it's shooting straight up in the air. You're not flying over the Pacific without catching that updraft. And that updraft is not coming to you. So he says, let's start walking. It's like, come on. So off we go, and fortunately, it's about one full step before you finally lean over the edge that wind comes racing up, and it is the most exhilarating feeling. I have never gone the other way out of an airplane. I'm sure some of you have. I don't think I'll be doing that in my life. But I'm thinking this is similar in reverse. It was really, really a special moment, not least of which because it was just beautiful and exhilarating to silently float over the ocean and just take in the gorgeous surroundings of a beautiful city. But what stuck with me later is that there's no way to get where we want to go unless we're willing to lean all the way over. Now, this next part is going to sound sort of hocus pocus, hooey, left coast, holistic, that's okay. No caveats. I don't just believe, but I know. When we summon within ourselves the bold energy to act, especially in the face of the unknown, other forces come to our aid. And I'm not just talking about a powerful updraft of wind to float us over the ocean. Action is magnetic. Courage begets courage. People see us risking. They come to help us. At least they come to be curious. At least they come to investigate, and that curiosity and that investigation enlivens us, helps us understand why we're doing it, and maybe even encourage us to take the next step. Okay? I know this is true, and I would bet many of you could tell a story of a time when you stepped forward into complexity, into an unknown, in the face of major change, and things moved with you and helped make it possible. Maybe not exactly as you had hoped or predicted. My second day fishing that lake, at the end, if all you saw was the end, you would say another successful day fishing. But that day did not unfold at all like I had hoped it would at the beginning based on that previous experience. And so it took some persistence, it took finally breaking down and opening up to someone else who could help to make it possible. So, Out on the edge is where we find the resources in ourselves, the resources from others to help us actually go where we want to go. This sounds, for me, just listening, as someone who doesn't like change all that much, it sounds maybe too easy. It sounds maybe even cliched. I'd think the same thing if that hadn't been precisely my experience. Over and again, when I've paid attention to who I am, when I've owned my behavior under stress, gotten honest about it, and attempted to find a new way, when I've opened myself to relationships and let other people help me. Let other people help me. It's a joke in our house. The joke in our house, Teresa and I with the kids, the joke is, don't tell me what to do. Let me do it my way. Let me persist, even though it looks ridiculous and doesn't make any sense. And we give each other such a hard time about it because it's actually pretty ridiculous. There's another way, usually a better way. Can we open ourselves to it? And finally, can we just decide, okay, we didn't see this coming, we don't want this change, we don't like these circumstances, we would never draw it up this way. Okay, let's get all of that energy out on the table. Let's just own that we're feeling this way, individually and as a group. Good. Now let's set it aside. What can we learn? What's the next step? How do we proceed? How do we help each other proceed in a way that feels really good to us, in a way that feels like we're honestly owning the reality of our circumstances from a place of a commitment to learning? Okay. Checking the time. Keep moving forward. Yeah, I just didn't want to race ahead and not have time to finish up. Are there any questions, ideas, or thoughts in your minds right now? Anything that you would like to comment on or ask about relative to what I've shared with you?
Timing on this is hard for me because we've been in this one facility for 51 years. Property got sold. We're having to move. And it's like we're starting all over again. And the fight of last 30-some odd years of building my little empire and then to start over again. It's kind of like, ooh.
That's a very hard thing to do.
Yeah.
Just this week, my wife's brothers packed up their dad from that beautiful spot in Mount Shasta because it's time for him to downsize. It's time for him to move into a facility that's more aligned with what he needs right now. At his age, physical condition, all the reasons you would make that move. And it's been so interesting to watch how they talk to each other back and forth. They've already done most of the sorting of stuff. They've already gone through most of the layers of things. But the things that come back that were always just taken for granted as, you know how we attach to objects, we attach to the familiar, we attach to those iconic maybe pieces of furniture or art, or even just, they were talking about a dumb old step stool. The dumb old step stool has been in their family for 50 years. That thing was well made, by the way. It's been in their family for 50 years, and they're going back and forth. Like, Dad doesn't need this in his new place. There's literally no reason to take it. Should I take it? Should I, right? And so we get hung up on, and appropriately so, we get hung up on all the small things when we have to go from what we know to a brand new experience. And it's okay, I think, to pause and really reflect on what do we want to bring forward with us to be successful in a new space, but what can we leave behind? And what actually is it really smart for us to leave behind because it won't serve as an anchor to our new experience? That it might somehow keep us stuck in the past. That could be objects, that could be processes, that could be attitudes, that could be certain employees who no longer fit what it is you're trying to accomplish. It may sound harsh, but there is a time for renewal. There is a time for change that we have to fully embrace if we're going to do it really well. thank you for raising that. Yes, please.
You talked about these limitations in this process and the outcome. And as you talked about going through and the eventual outcome in all your demonstrations was positive. What happens when you are met with failure?
Yeah.
Either your own failure or the failure of the relationship assisting you, or just that the outcome is not what you wanted.
Yeah, great. Thank you for asking. I should have mentioned about the parasailing over the ocean in La Jolla. When the windsock is pointed the other way, no one's trying to get off the ground and have a nice sail, yeah? So two thoughts there. One is, we've got to read the conditions of the moment prior to acting so that we make really good ones based on what we know. And that's an obvious one. No wind, we're not parasailing today. Today's not the day for that particular action. The other thing to comment on, to your point, is even under the best of conditions, people have fallen down onto the cliffs below. That has happened. And so I think for us it's about, A, thoughtfully calculating risks, which is why number 2 is so important. Who around me can I rely on to help me really think this through? Or am I so stuck in my head and potentially and likely not seeing the variables that I do need to consider before I take this action? So, fundamentally important. When we fail, when it doesn't work, when it goes sideways, that's when I go back to my earlier comment about having still the opportunity to choose our response. I will often ask a group in a small group setting where we have like a longer, more intimate conversation in a small group. I will ask them to reflect on the most difficult decision they ever made, the time when it really went, it was hard to make and it went sideways. Yeah. And they tell the story, and to a person, they tell the story finally from a place of, and it got me exactly where I needed to be even though it didn't work out. I needed to go through that difficulty to figure it out. And I'm always amazed, like, why is it? Is it a human condition that we have to rationalize the painful experiences in a positive way to explain them? That might be part of it. But it also might be that when we recognize that we're actually here. You're here right now, as am I. By a show of hands, have you been through a failure, a challenge, something you did not expect that you would recover from? By show of hands, those of you courageous on a Monday morning, thank you. Yes. So most of the people in this room have made a hard choice, have suffered, be it financially, be it health-related, be it you name it. But you're here. And so I think that what that tells us is we have extraordinary adaptive abilities just as people, but as educated people, as successful people, as thoughtful people, we have extraordinary abilities to adapt. And so the best thing we can do when things go sideways is to step back from it once we process the emotional realities of that, once we process just the harshness of being let down by our circumstance or being wrong, and take a step back and go, okay, where from here? What can we learn from it? In my work with organizations, and this was certainly true for us during the time I was at TaylorMade Golf, it was an incredibly successful run. You heard those numbers, 600 million to 1.6 billion. That happened in 10 years. What the company didn't get very good at during that passage of time was reflecting on, okay, it's working. Why is it working as well as it is? and what could we predict about how or why it might not work next time? Because it did stop working. And not just because of things the company did, but the marketplace changed. The industry changed. And not being prepared for that meant the organization suffered so badly it got put up for sale and was bought by a venture capital firm for a third of that top line revenue number. So we have models for this in the hospital setting. It's called a postmortem. It's not a pleasant thing to imagine, but how else are you going to learn? And I'm sorry, I want to go to the hospital that has regular postmortems because they learn, they understand what happens, and they make better decisions next time as a result. In the military, it's called an after-action review. You don't just do it and go, yay, for us, we did a good job. You come back together. Successful, failure, in between, doesn't matter. You talk about it. You pick it apart. You memorize the good stuff. You work on the stuff that didn't work. That is a discipline that comes, I think, from awareness and relationships. Otherwise, when things go bad, we are really capable of getting mired in the frustration of the loss or the failure, as opposed to the problem solving and learning piece of it. Yes, please.
I think for me also the challenge sometimes is getting other people on board with change too, whether it's in your personal life or your business life. If you talk about that, getting other people to come on board with you.
Yes. So in your experience, when you have been able to do that, when you have been able to, or when you've made your best, what you would consider best effort, what has worked for you?
Really showing, talking about where we are now, the possible advantages, but still can be a bumpy road because change is hard. People get very comfortable, I think, who they are, and they don't want to take risks. But I think the risk.
Sure. So I really appreciate the two parts of that you illustrated. One is you explain why. And that seems so obvious to us, but especially organizationally, often it's just a group of senior leaders met offsite for a day, came back, and now we're doing this. Like, okay, we will defer to that because you're wise, and paid a lot, and you're supposed to make those decisions. But the great leaders pause, get the team together, not one time, not twice, as often as it takes to explain what we're doing and why. The secret sauce of effective leadership, in my humble opinion, is redundancy. Redundancy. Everyone's like, oh, how boring. You're supposed to be charismatic and bold and give a great talk. No, it's redundancy. Here's what we're doing and why. New group. Here's what we're doing and why. Back to the first group. Here's what we're doing and why. The second thing is to be honest about the realities. Here's what we can predict. This is what you said. It's going to be bumpy. We know. We can already anticipate. This is going to be tough. We're not sure how this is going to go. That's a great time to get people's input. So if we know that now, what do you all think we should be doing, planning to mitigate the realities that we're going to face, and maybe the ones, what are some others that we might imagine together? And I would add to your first two really great thoughts on this, it's attitude. Not a Pollyanna pretending everything's going to be okay attitude, but this like bulletproof attitude of positive and possibility-focused change orientation. It's not an option. This is the hard truth. Why are we doing learning initiatives in our company? Why are we talking about assessments of our systems and our practices? Because you have to change. You have to.
I don't want to.
I know, Kevin, but you have to. And better us doing it incrementally ahead of the realities that are for sure coming at us than to be caught by surprise and have to rebuild the whole thing from scratch. Leadership is about seeing ahead. Management, if you want to differentiate, is about being in the work itself, making sure stuff is working. Leadership is up here. What is coming? This is the position of leadership, actually. Not because I'm above you, that's the traditional hierarchical model, but because from an elevated place I can see more. And that's my job. Looking down the road, being in the scout party, checking things out, coming to conferences. What's the buzz? What's the conversation? What are people thinking about? What are they challenged by? What are solutions they're considering? You're going to take all that back to your company. And then, with a positive attitude and a lot of redundancy and a reality check about what it might cost us to do it, you're going to share those things and start making plans on how to implement them.
That was just a great point about leadership looking ahead, management is dealing with the now. Those two, they just
Yeah,
on those.
good, thank you, yes. It's right now, management is right now. Processes have to work. Managers make sure they work. Leaders are on the lookout for how and why those processes will need to change. If you're a leader caught up in the process stuff, and you wear many hats, I know that. You're doing regular old transactional work during your day, you're doing strategic planning, you're doing all kinds of stuff. And so it can be tough to change that, that perspective from the work itself to where things are going. And the real reason it's tough is the work itself is so gratifying, isn't it? Is it only me? I mean, am I the only one who absolutely loves to do laundry, do the dishes, do yard work? Do you know why I love these things, aside from the fact that I'm obsessive and compulsive?
Makes your wife happy.
It makes my wife happy. What's that? It gets done. It feels awesome to finish things. So much of our work is never actually quite done. It's still happening. It's unresolved. People have questions, you know. It's frustrating to lead something. It's always changing, always moving. Those dishes are clean. You cannot come in here and tell me from some philosophical point of view that they're in a process of being clean. No, no, no. They're cleaned. I did that. You know, yay for me. Now, managers know the dishes are going to get dirty again, and the lawn's going to grow again, and the laundry, et cetera, yeah? But that's a cycle. That's management. That's management. Leadership is, there's probably a better way to do the dishes. Or maybe we need to outsource the yard work, you know, on and on and on. Yeah. Anybody else?
We're a little ahead of schedule, so don't be bashful. Some anecdotes?
Shouldn't a manager be a leader? I mean, why would you be in that position if you're not a leader, and you're not looking outside the box, and you're not looking forward?
Yeah. So, thank you, because nothing is quite that black and white, of course, as I described it. I would like managers to adapt more leader-like qualities, for sure. And those are things like communicating with your people, taking care of them, coaching them, checking in on them, asking their input. It's not just about what you think, it's about what we think. And taking those ideas and in a dynamic, ongoing conversational way, being in a relationship with whoever the formal leaders are. If there's another leader above that manager, let's say, we're talking about that stuff all the time. And so as a manager, I'm challenged to get myself out of the process once in a while, to take that look around. And likewise, the leader's job is to get in the process once in a while to know what's going on. We would hear in the production facility where I used to work, there was regularly, right? You set up a complicated production line, things are going to go wrong. And so there would be some breakdown or some process, you know, that failed, and the managers would go off into a room and talk about it, and then come back and sort of proclaim the solution. And then we would go to the person, the supervisor running that production line, and say, hey, do you have any thoughts on what we should have done differently, how we could fix it? Yes. Oh, you did? Well, why didn't you share that when they went off to that room to solve it? Because nobody asked me. So the mistake we make is forgetting that the people closest to the work are best equipped to figure out the problems with the work. And that's where great leadership first says, and management, what's working here? What's not working? What do we need to learn? Now we'll take that information back and go and refine it You got to keep working because that's your job. Keep this line rolling along as it needs to. We're going to go back and refine that process. We're going to come back to you and check it against what you think so you can help us make sure that we've done the right thing. That has to be a dynamic conversation. Yes, please.
So let's say, so going back to change, what if you are trying to get someone on board with changing and they finally, accept it and say, okay, let's do something different. But what if the idea that you thought was going to be a good idea doesn't turn out the way that you wanted to, and that person who's very stubborn with change reverts right back to the original, plan, and then you have no opportunity in giving them more ideas about change.
Yeah.
Told you so.
I told you so. Yeah, that's great. That's
yeah,
great.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, so this is where a change orientation is a cultural dynamic. So the first thought that came to my mind was change is a process, not an event. So our hiring and training practices need to include really healthy conversations about the dynamics of change. That when you come to work here or being a part of this means that we're going to be trying things, and we're going to need you to inform that process. And we're going to have honest conversations about when they don't work. But what we're not going to do in our particular culture is get on our high horse of I told you so, because that serves nobody. It serves nobody. When I was between my sophomore and junior years of college, I worked on campus that summer. I worked for the conferences and events program. So all of these groups like you would come to the campus and use the facilities for your conference. And so I was doing, really fun things like changing beds and stripping beds and making beds and setting up tables and chairs for events and, just good hard labor. Well, we had this one group come and it was a disaster from the start. Huge group. We were understaffed. We had missed on a bunch of the things that they required. They were not happy and also just sort of difficult to deal with. And we had this emergency meeting of our team to figure out what to do. It's like Wednesday, and they're going to be here through Saturday, and we've got to right this ship. So the boss is sitting there, we're gathered around, and in my defense, okay, I'm like 19, so. But I go, he goes, what do you think we ought to do, Michael? Michael says, what do you think we ought to do? And I just blurt out, we never should have had them come in the first place. The death stare I got from him. Useless perspective. From an emotional, not very self-aware place. He taught me in that moment, that's not the attitude right now. It's a solution orientation. And so when we have team members who come up with that, to me, that I told you so is really just an expression of the emotions we feel in the face of uncertainty, and we have to defend ourselves against feeling that. It's uncomfortable to feel that. And if we can get underneath that with people and talk about it, I get that you're frustrated. Tell me more about that. Do a little coaching, have some honest conversation. What's going on? I'm frustrated too. Let's figure it out. That can diffuse that. Not perfectly, understood, but it can make it a more honest conversation than just a reactive one. How are we doing?
Anyone
Up here, yeah,
else?
please.
We had a gal that was working in the office for about 16 years, 18 years. And she fell in the restroom. I was saying a gal that worked for us for 16, 18 years, she was kind of doing our charter work. And the main person, she's in the restroom, she falls and breaks both of her wrists, wrists. So she's out of work for a while. And of course you're scrambling to do all the things that she was doing. And as a group effort, everybody jumps in. And I don't necessarily do that part of it every day. So some of the other people would step up and cover what she was doing. Of course, at that time you realize how unorganized things are. Maybe for her it was getting by, but there's notes everywhere. There's things that were just really needed an overhaul and a look at the way we were doing things. So we worked with our programmer and collectively got together and said, this would work. Let's do a grid map, kind of on a schedule, on a calendar, and the charters would be, school would be yellow, and the ones that are to be announced with or not confirmed would be in red. Quotes would be a different color. And she come back to work, and the whole thing had been remodified, and she was resisting the new change, but it was so much simpler. And now we had the whole office, except for her, understanding what was going on, because they had caught up and everybody got more involved and all had an input on how it was put together. And when she came back, she was the hardest one to train to change the way she was doing it.
Yeah.
But it really was effective, and sometimes when you get faced with adversity and the group all comes together, they felt like they all had a part in it, and maybe they were more receptive to the change.
Right, and my guess is the root of her resistance was that she didn't have a part in it.
No, but when she came back, she tried to go back to the old way.
Sure.
But we had to really kind of force her to say,
Sure.
we're done with that.
I'm pretty good at navigating my household furniture in the dark. You know why? I put it there. I know where it is. And if you come in and if you change it all, even if you can prove to me beyond a shadow of a doubt with all your maps and plans and logistical, smarts that it's a better layout, if I stub my toe in the dark, that layout sucks, right? That's just normal human reaction. And so that's such a difficult situation because you didn't have the chance to engage her because she wasn't there. And yet, until we feel some even partial sense of ownership, it's very hard to overcome the loss of control that comes with changes that happen without our involvement. Very, very hard. And so again, leadership, management, we move fast. We don't think we have the time. Sometimes we don't have the time to make sure everyone knows every detail about what's going to be happening differently this time. But every effort we can make to that end will save us so many headaches down the road. So many. Because people will know that you took the time and made the effort to get them involved, which feels difficult on the front end, but pays massive, massive dividends later on. Any last comment or question? Yes, please.
What happens when you ask them for all their assistance and ideas, and oftentimes you can't put those things into place?
Yes.
And I understand you want to tell them,
Yes.
but are there additional ideas because you have so much time to explain?
Right. Yeah, I love that. Great question. I think a lot of the resistance to asking team members for their perspectives is, what if I have to tell them we can't do that? What if I have to tell them what's going on in the industry or our particular business that makes that unrealistic right now? Well, they'll be smarter. And they'll appreciate that you've given them a larger context for them to consider their role in the organization. I don't know too many people who don't want to have a deeper understanding of the way things work around here. And if their idea sharing creates an opening for you to educate them about the business, I think that's a wonderful opportunity. And now they're equipped to come back with better ideas. And they might go 0 for 2, 0 for 3, 0 for 4, all the way up to 20, but then there's going to be something. But then our job, your job, is to not say, oh, we can or can't do that, but to always be harvesting from their ideas. Yeah, you know what, we can't do that, but there's something in there that we might be able to use. And if you are honest about that and actually make a faithful effort to try to incorporate the things that your team has to say, they're going to be loyal to you for a long time to come. But I just think we got to treat our team members like adults. Here's why. This is what's going on. And the more context you can give them, the smarter they'll be.
We can't buy 10 new buses.
We can't do it. It's just not going to happen, and it's not going to happen this year for sure. One last comment.
I was just going to say,
Oh, two more.
well, at our organization, we've had some tremendous growth this past year, and we've hired people, we've had a lot of new people come and join the organization. And so we really do open up that line of communication with our frontline staff, which is our drivers, basically.
Yep.
And then, they bring ideas, but sometimes they don't know, like, why we can't do a change, because they don't know the other part of it that they're not involved in. So we explain that to them, but I think it's really important to, listen to them and have them be engaged and take ownership of the changes in the rules and regulations, and it's really worked tremendously.
Great. Good for you. Create town halls, create e-newsletters, create conference calls that people can dial into. If you're remote employees, once a month we're going to sit on the phone for an hour, talk about the news of the day. There's a million things you can do. People are going to come to you and say, well, I don't know about this. And you can say, okay, I appreciate that you don't know, but did you read the email? Did you come into the conference call? Did you join the town hall? Because we're setting these things up for you. And if you don't do those now and you start doing them, don't be surprised if people still are in the dark, 6 months from now. It takes time, but you've got to stay at it. Back to redundancy. It's hugely worth your time.
We ask them to bring their best practices that they've learned throughout the years, because a lot of the people have a lot of experience from other companies.
Of course. That's great. Okay, one last.
To kind of piggyback off what you said, as the person that writes the check, you're always thinking about the cost of what the staff wants to do. When the whole staff is saying, we really want to do this, and you know for a fact that's not going to work, at what point do you let them trip over themselves and learn the mistake that you've learned 10 times? Or do you say, no, that's a bad idea, we're not doing it, and then, oh, Ryan never listens to anybody.
Because I said so.
Right.
Like the parent.
Yeah. For me, to me, that's an equation that we have to sort out in the moment, right? That is the cost of the mistake that you see likely to be made worth the learning that will happen because of it. And sometimes the answer to that is, yeah, it's okay. It's okay. I learn by doing things. A lot of people do, most of us in some way. So we have to find out for ourselves with guidance, with infrastructure around us to support the failure. If you're not failing in your business, if people aren't getting to experiment and mess things up, then no one's learning anything. So I think enough boundaries around those efforts are important, but at times you got to let them go. You got to let them go. You got to let them find out for themselves. You know this if you're a parent, yes?
Let it go.
I'm the smartest guy in the world when it comes to telling my kids what to do. I got it all figured out. And most of that is just I want to protect them from stepping in it like I did. But that doesn't really help them very much. So guidance, values, clear boundaries and guidelines, but once those are established, people have to get their hands dirty and find things out for themselves to become the kind of contributors that will be with you for a very long time. Thank you so much for the conversation. This was great, and the chance to be with you for a little while this morning. I write a daily blog about some of these ideas and the experiences that I have in organizational life, if that's of interest to you. And I'd love to continue the conversation with anybody at a later time if that would be of value to you. So I hope you have a wonderful conference. Thanks for the chance to be a part of it. Have a good day.